England, according to Wikipedia, is a country that is a part of the United Kingdom. It shares land borders with Wales to its west and Scotland to its north. Separated from continental Europe by the North Sea to its east and the English Channel to the south, the country covers 5/8 of the island of Great Britain, which lies in the North Atlantic, and includes over 100 smaller islands such as the Isles of Scilly and the Isle of Wight. From a historical point, inhabitants of this land have seen a peaceful last 1,000 years in regards to little incursion into the mainland, but before the year 1066, the final conquest of England, the peoples native here have seen foreign invasion consistently. First, it was the Celts who came and settled this land, intermixing with the original Britons, and then the Romans led by Caesar, who had heard stories of this strange land that many did not believe to be non-fiction. Following the Romans, Saxons, Angles and Jutes came from modern-day Germany and Denmark to find a new home and wealth, driving many of the Celts to the far corners of the island. After several hundred years, the Norsemen came, cousins to the former conquerors, seeking the same land and wealth. Finally, the Normans, Franco-Norse descendants, killed the Anglo-Saxon king and won the War of Succession in 1066, marking the last foreign invasion. Of course, wars would come, and conquest came with them, but this would be the result of internal strife and intrigue in politics. Right in the middle of all of this, and right in the middle of Britain, was a land called Mercia, or March, meaning people of the Marches, was a kingdom that occupied the centre of the island of Britain for a rough period of time, between the 600s and late 800s, facing both internal and external strife on behalf of the Norsemen and their heathen army. Mercians, dweller of the marches or border people, lived in this country. The Mercia was not often a state, but more of a region or collection of allies, townships and individuals who shared the commonality of being frequently pillaged or levied for war. Unfortunately, due to the geopolitics of Great Britain at the time, Mercia was often the location for war, or at the very least would face the brunt of rivalry between any of the neighbouring kingdoms. Unfortunately, not as many sources have been recorded on the Kingdom of Mercia in comparison to other countries in Britannia, but we know enough about them, and their differences in relation to the other inhabitants of early medieval Britain. First, an overview of the relationship between the petty kingdoms of England must be given to really understand the interesting power and diplomatic dynamic between these nations. Beginning with East Anglia, a smaller nation when compared to the others, comprising both modern-day Suffolk and Norfolk, was potentially home to the person founded in the notorious ship burial site at Sutton Hoo, Redwold, first East Anglican king to be baptized Christian. While the kingdom thrived during his reign, following his famous burial, it started on a decline, being increasingly dominated by Mercia as the land further Christianized. Eventually, Mercia would absorb the territory, only for it to once again reclaim independence, thus sadly fading away in the carnage of the heathen army. Just south of East Anglia was Kent, the reported first landing site of Anglo-Saxons during their migration in the 5th to 6th centuries, as well as the nation which had close ties to the Frankish king of Paris through marriage between Bertha, who was a Christian, and Ethelbert, who was Kentish. The Pope of this time sent missionaries to his court in the late 590s, who would later convert the king and many of his subjects. The king, in return, gave some land to missionaries, Canterbury. Unfortunately for the Kents, much like East Anglia, the land would come under Mercian dominance in the mid-700s, and remain subject to them until the West Saxons conquered the region in the early 800s, being largely integrated into the Kingdom of Wessex, though keeping some unique features, such as the larger power difference between peasants and rulers, as well as the ancestry they had, Jutes, or Jutes. The West Saxons, or Wessex. Cerdic had landed in Hampshire in 495 after leaving Saxony. Some 25 years later, he had taken the title of King of the West Saxons, suggesting that, perhaps, a large amount of resistance was met in the earlier days. However, in time, these Saxons had spread from Hampshire to Wiltshire in just 2 to 3 generations, fighting both Welshmen and Britons, as well as somewhat unsurprisingly, Angles and Jutes. A battle between Northumbrians and the West Saxons and Mercia took place after a Wessexian king's son attempted to kill the king of the former's country, though this ended poorly. As well as this, an interesting time spanning reportedly 1 year saw a queen rule, Shakespeare. Unfortunately, it does seem that she was more of a puppet than anything, but still nice to know. However, some genocidal warmonger king later, Caedwalla, who apparently conquered Kent, Isle of Wight and Sussex, dying after being baptised by the Pope, despite killing and forcing Christians to renounce their faith, was Cynwulf, a king who conquered parts of South Mercia, despite previously being subservient, and held on to this territory until Otho of Mercia drove him back. Literally north of the Humber River, Northumbria, or Northern Humber, was the most northern of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, bordering the Celts to the north and stretching from the Irish to the North Seas. As well as being the most northern, it was also the largest of such kingdoms, was often overshadowed by its southern neighbours. Despite this, a golden age of literature, theology, and also military might lasted from the 6th to 8th centuries. Prizing the former nations of Bernicia and Deira, the state had expanded rapidly south to the River Tay, stopping at Mercia's might. The kings of this region were also interesting. When a prince of Deira, the aforementioned Northumbrian king who was almost murdered, further expanded his state and had won his battle over Wessex, proclaiming himself the over-king of English kingdoms. Converting to Christianity following an alliance formed between Northumbria and Kent, from Edwin and a princess of the latter state's marriage, he made the smart move of giving God and his new faith the victory over Wessex. On the 11th of April 627, Paulinus, a Roman missionary, baptized the Lord in York, marking another end to pagan dominance in Britain. Concluding this overview of Mercia and the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms following their arrival, I would like to note that the period of time between their arrival and the emergence of Vikings at the tail end of the 8th century was roughly 300 years, and that each British conqueror's descendants would face yet another wave of migration and excursion. Thus ends the Yeah, I keep, every time I keep stuttering and mispronouncing something. This video took so many cuts. Anyway, thus ends this video on the tumultuous time of Anglo-Saxon Britain pre-Viking arrival.